Sally Field has always been known for her honesty. But for 30 years, there was one thing she never talked about. Not in interviews, not in memoirs, not even when the world begged for answers after Robin Williams passed. She said it wasn't her story to tell. But now, at 77, she's finally breaking her silence. And what she just revealed about Robin Williams, and the secret he begged her to keep during Mrs. Doubtfire, has left fans in tears. Sally Field had worked with some of the greatest actors in Hollywood. But Robin Williams, he was different. From the moment they stepped onto the Mrs. Doubtfire set, something clicked between them. Not in a romantic way, but something deeper, a kind of unspoken understanding. Sally was no stranger to emotionally layered characters, and Robin, well, Robin could make an entire room cry or collapse with laughter, sometimes in the same breath. But behind his humor, Sally saw something else. A flicker of sadness. A man who used laughter like armor. He'd make the crew laugh until their sides hurt, she once recalled. Then he'd walk off to the corner, quiet, like he'd given a little piece of himself away. In the early days of filming Mrs. Doubtfire, Robin was all energy. Improvising lines, switching voices, inventing jokes no one else could dream up. He was a tornado of genius, bouncing from one idea to the next before the director could even call cut. Sally, seasoned and composed, met his chaos with calm, and somehow that balance worked. There were moments when the crew just watched the two of them interact. No script, no rehearsal, just raw chemistry. Robin would throw a line into the air, and Sally would catch it without blinking. A raised eyebrow, a sigh, a smile that said, "I see you," because she did. And he knew it. What no one else realized was that Robin, beneath the voices and disguises, was a man who needed someone to see past the performance. Sally didn't push him. She didn't ask him to explain his moods. But she paid attention. Late in the afternoons, when filming wrapped, Robin didn't always head to his trailer. Sometimes he'd sit with her. Just sit. No characters, no accents. Just Robin. And Sally. He told her once, "You're the only one who doesn't expect me to be funny all the time." That mattered more than she could say. They came from different worlds. Robin, a whirlwind of improv and electricity. Sally, deliberate and intuitive. But both of them knew what it meant to carry pain quietly. To perform when your heart wasn't in it. To smile when your world was falling apart. During one of those long, quiet breaks, something happened. Robin leaned in. His voice lowered, and he told her something he'd never said aloud. Not to the press, not to fans, not even to his family. A truth so personal, so fragile, he made her promise never to repeat it. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't gossip. It was something about him, who he really was beneath the makeup and the jokes. And in that moment, Sally knew she was holding something sacred. She kept that promise for over 30 years, even after he died. Even when she was asked again and again to talk about him, she refused, because Robin had asked her to. And for Sally Field, a promise wasn't just words. It was a matter of honor. But something changed recently. And now, after all these years, she's finally ready to share what Robin told her that day. It's not the story anyone expected. It's more powerful than that. To the outside world, Mrs. Doubtfire was pure magic. A chaotic, heartwarming comedy that made millions laugh and cry. But behind the camera, the atmosphere was far more complicated. The crew adored Robin. Every day on set was like attending a live comedy show, only the star never turned it off. He didn't just read the lines. He transformed them. Voices, gestures, improvised dialogue. He could change the tone of a scene with one look or completely derail it with a joke so outrageous. Even the sound guy would miss his cue because he was laughing too hard. And Sally? She played the straight woman in the film and often off-camera too. While Robin was flipping into new characters mid-sentence, Sally stayed grounded, keeping the scenes emotionally real. It was this perfect contrast, Robin's comedic chaos and Sally's emotional gravity, that made their scenes together so unforgettable. But that contrast was more than acting. It was a mirror of something deeper. Because while Robin made the world laugh, those closest to him could see it wasn't always coming from a place of joy. There were days, Sally later admitted, when he didn't seem like he wanted to be there, not because he didn't care, but because something was weighing on him. The crew called it the shift. 1 minute he'd be lighting up the room. The next, his eyes would dim. He'd go quiet, withdraw. It didn't happen often, but Sally noticed. Every time, he was never unkind, never difficult, but sometimes there was a sadness in his silence that was louder than any joke he ever told. And it wasn't just Sally who saw it. Director Chris Columbus once said, "There was a deep melancholy in Robin, even at his funniest, but no one talked about it openly. The show had to go on, and Robin, like always, made sure it did." Still, it was during those quiet moments between scenes, when the lights were being repositioned or the makeup was being reapplied, that something deeper would surface. Robin would sit beside Sally and just breathe. Sometimes they didn't speak. Other times, he'd share pieces of himself, small, fragile truths that felt almost out of place in the whirlwind of a movie set. It was during one of those in-between moments, with the cameras cooling and everyone buzzing around them, that he said it. "Sally," he began, his voice unusually still. "I need you to promise me something." She turned to him. No cameras, no lines, just Robin, looking at her with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "but you can't ever repeat it. Not while I'm here. Not to anyone." She nodded slowly. He trusted her, and she knew better than to break that trust. And then he told her. A truth so personal, so naked, it almost didn't make sense coming from a man who made the whole world laugh for a living. He didn't joke afterward, didn't deflect. He just sat there, vulnerable, exposed. And Sally understood exactly why he'd never told anyone else. Because if that truth got out, it would change the way people saw him. Maybe even hurt the people he loved. So she said nothing. Not then. Not for decades. But as the years passed, and as Robin's absence became heavier, something began to shift. A letter, conversation, a moment she couldn't ignore. And that's when Sally decided it was time. Time to tell the truth he had carried alone for far too long. It wasn't like Robin to be still. But in that moment, with the hum of the set behind them and a script waiting off to the side, Robin sat beside Sally in complete silence. No impressions, no characters, just Robin. And he looked tired. Not physically, soul tired. He took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the floor, and finally said, "I'm scared, Sally." She turned toward him gently, not pressing. She knew enough about pain to recognize when someone needed to speak without interruption. "I'm scared," he repeated. "That one day, they're gonna forget who I really was. That I'll just be the punchlines, the voices, the jokes." His voice cracked, just barely. Robin wasn't afraid of dying. He wasn't afraid of fading from the spotlight. What haunted him was the idea that the world only saw a mask, and never the man beneath it. He told Sally that the character of Mrs. Doubtfire, funny, chaotic, lovable, had become more than just a role to him. "She's everything I'm not allowed to be," he said. "She gets to say the soft things. She gets to cry and not scare people away." For a man known for making the world laugh, Robin was rarely given space to simply feel. He confessed to Sally that he often felt trapped in his own legend. That the moment he stopped being funny, even for a second, people looked at him like something was broken. And so he performed, constantly. "I don't know if they'd love me if I stopped," he said. "Really love me." And that was the secret. Not an affair, not a scandal, but a truth so raw, so human, that it shattered Sally's heart. This man, one of the most beloved figures in the world, feared that he was only loved for what he gave, not for who he was. He looked her in the eyes and said, "Promise me if you ever talk about this, wait until I'm gone. And only if it might help someone. Someone who feels like they're only valued when they're performing." Sally didn't speak. She just nodded. She didn't ask for more. She didn't try to reassure him with cliches. Because she knew that feeling. That ache of wondering whether people loved the role or the person. And in that silence between them, a bond was sealed. Not as co-stars, not as colleagues, as two people who understood each other's loneliness in a room full of applause. From that day on, Sally kept his words locked away like a precious letter. Reporters would ask her about Robin after his death. They'd push, "What was he really like?" And she would smile, offering stories that protected his dignity. But never the full truth. Because she wasn't ready. Because maybe the world wasn't ready. But something shifted recently. Maybe it was the rise in stories of people silently battling mental health issues. Maybe it was the flood of fan messages, still mourning Robin a decade later. Or maybe it was simply time. At 77, Sally Field finally spoke the words he asked her to hold back. Not for fame, not for closure, but because somewhere out there, someone still believes they're only lovable when they're performing. And they need to hear this, because Robin Williams wasn't just a character. He was a man, with fears, hopes, and a fragile heart. And that was his secret. Sally Field has never been one to chase the spotlight. She's built her career on quiet strength, playing women who hold their families together, who endure without ever demanding sympathy. And off-screen, she's much the same, measured, protective, private. So when Robin Williams asked her to keep his secret, she didn't hesitate. There was no question, no weighing the pros and cons. Just a quiet promise between friends. And she kept it, even after his death, when tributes poured in, when fans clung to every memory, when the media came calling. Sally said only what she thought Robin would have wanted. The warmth, the kindness, the brilliance, but never the fear. Never the quiet confession he shared with her behind the cameras of Mrs. Doubtfire. Because that was his story. And for years, Sally didn't believe it was her place to tell it. After Robin died, she retreated further. She rarely gave interviews. When she did, she spoke gently, carefully. You could see it in her eyes. Grief not just for a co-star, but for a man she had deeply understood and mourned in silence. People often assumed they weren't close. That because they didn't vacation together or post smiling photos, they were just professional colleagues. But what they didn't realize was that some of the deepest connections don't happen in public. They happen in the in-between, in the silence, in the spaces where no one is watching. For Sally, the weight of Robin's secret became heavier with time. Not because she wanted to unburden herself, but because she began to see how many people were carrying that same fear. She saw it in young actors pushed to be on all the time. She saw it in interviews with comedians who used laughter as a shield. She saw it in her own sons, brilliant, complicated men growing up in a world that didn't always allow them to be vulnerable. And she thought about Robin, about his words. If you ever talk about this, wait until I'm gone. And only if it might help someone. She carried that line with her like a compass. Every time she was asked about him, she'd pause. Every time she wrote about her career, she left that part out. Until recently, it wasn't one moment that changed her mind. It was a slow tide. Letters from fans. Articles about mental health. A young man she met backstage who told her he didn't know how to be himself without making others laugh. And then, one day, she found herself sitting in front of a journalist who asked the question she had dodged for decades. What was Robin really like, off camera? And this time she didn't dodge it. I promised him I wouldn't tell, she said quietly. But I think, maybe now he'd understand. It wasn't about exposing him. It was about honoring him. Because Robin's greatest fear wasn't that people would know too much. It was that they'd never know the real him at all. And Sally, after all these years, realized that the greatest way to keep his memory alive wasn't to protect the mask. It was to reveal the man. The man who doubted whether he was lovable without the laughter. The man who made the world smile, even when his own heart was breaking. And the friend who trusted her to carry his truth, until the world was finally ready to hear it. When Sally Field finally spoke the words Robin had once begged her to keep, it wasn't during a press tour. It wasn't in front of flashing cameras or a viral headline moment. It was in a quiet sit-down interview. One where she'd been asked the same question she'd heard for years. What was Robin Williams like? Really like? And this time, Sally didn't deflect. She didn't reach for a funny memory or quote a line from Mrs. Doubtfire. She took a breath. Her voice lowered. Her eyes, always so expressive, seemed to cloud with something more than nostalgia. And she told them, "He was terrified," she said, "not of dying, not of failure, but of being forgotten as a person." She explained what Robin had shared in private, that he feared the world only loved him for the performance, that no one wanted the real man, that without the voices, the chaos, the genius, there was nothing left worth loving. It was a heartbreaking confession, not because it painted Robin in a different light, but because it made him more real than ever. And when the clip surfaced online, fans didn't scroll past it. They stopped, they watched, and they cried, because everyone had their own version of Robin Williams in their heart. For some, he was the voice of their childhood, the genie in Aladdin, the teacher in Dead Poets Society, the nanny in Mrs. Doubtfire. For others, he was the adult who made pain bearable through humor, a reminder that you could be broken and still bring light to others. And now, hearing that he, the man who gave so much, believed he was only loved because of what he gave, it hit hard. Comment sections filled with stories. "I used to laugh at Robin when I was in the darkest place of my life. He saved me, and I never knew he needed saving too. My brother was like him, always the joker, never the one to ask for help." And through it all, people kept returning to Sally, to the woman who had held onto the story for 3 decades. Not for fame, not for attention, but out of loyalty. And when she finally shared it, she didn't just give fans closure. She gave them permission. Permission to admit that they're scared. That they want to be loved for who they are, not who they pretend to be. That sometimes, even the brightest lights burn quietly in the background. One fan put it best. Robin's legacy was never just the laughter. It was the depth behind it. And now, thanks to Sally, we finally see it. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a shocking confession. It was a truth so deeply human, it made everyone pause. Because we all wear masks. We all wonder if we're enough without the roles we play. And Robin Williams, in all his brilliance, was no different. Sally Field's decision to finally speak wasn't about breaking a promise. It was about keeping the spirit of that promise, by making sure the world never forgets the man behind the magic. The one who made us laugh, because sometimes he didn't know how to cry. Robin Williams once said, "I think the saddest people always try their hardest to make people happy, because they know what it feels like to feel absolutely worthless." And maybe that's what Sally Field was trying to protect all these years. Not just his secret, but his soul. She knew the world needed Robin to be more than a memory. They needed to understand that behind the genius was a man. Fragile, thoughtful, scared of being forgotten, scared of never being seen. In finally breaking her silence, Sally didn't just reveal something about Robin. She revealed something about all of us. How many people live their lives performing? Smiling when they want to scream, giving when they're already empty. Robin's greatest gift wasn't the laughter. It was the way he made us feel understood, even when he never said a word about his own pain. And now, through Sally's words, we see him more clearly than ever. Not as Mrs. Doubtfire, not as the genie, not as the comedian with 1,000 voices, but as Robin, just Robin. And somehow that's more powerful than all the characters he ever played. If this story stayed with you, the next one will stay with you even longer. Watch it now.